Hello, and welcome to Namio's Corner, where we explore the best, the worst, and the incredibly mediocre in religious art and culture. Let's talk about Mollywood. It's not Hollywood, it's not Bollywood, it's Mollywood, or Mormon Hollywood. The movement was started unintentionally in 2000 by Richard Dutcher, an independent filmmaker who noticed the flowering market of niche films targeted towards various subcultures and decided to try making a movie aimed at his own. That movie was God's Army, a surprisingly honest look at the lives of Mormon missionaries living in Los Angeles. Brilliantly written and acted with complex characters and an interesting plot, it is, in my opinion, one of the best religious films ever made. But that's not what's really important about God's Army. What's really important, at least as far as the creation of Mollywood is concerned, is that God's Army made money. Shot on a budget of only $300,000, the movie grossed a little over $2 million in its very limited theatrical run. This caught the eye of a number of other companies and entrepreneurs hoping to see similar success, and over the course of the next decade they began to flood the market with LDS films. Generally, these productions are low-budget ventures with a wide range of both subject matter and quality. And while most companies seem to be happy with their admittedly narrow audience, others are looking to expand. Enter Candlelight Media, a Mormon company making Mormon movies who decided that it would be a great marketing idea to start creating dual versions of their films. One cut for their LDS audience, and one for the larger and more profitable Evangelical Christian market. This choice brings up a lot of interesting questions, the most obvious one being this. If you're so adamant that Mormons are Christians and not a pseudo-Christian cult as they're often accused of being, why would you need to make an alternate version for the evangelical market? Shouldn't the Mormon cut, by definition, be Christian enough? For that matter, how will an LDS studio edit a movie to make it more palatable for an evangelical audience? What elements of a Mormon movie do they feel need to be changed to avoid alienating that audience? Most importantly, will either final product be interesting or entertaining for anyone at all? Well, today we're going to find out as we look at a recent Candlelight Media offering. The LDS cut is called Rescued, and its evangelical counterpart is called Island of Grace. We open in a generic office, where our female lead, Megan, is a generic employee of a generic company. She's hard at work mooning over a co-worker named Mark with a friend who I'll just call Blondie McVapid. We're soon introduced to Chris, who works in generic company's vaguely IT-related department. He's here to bug Megan for missing a church function the night before. Megan explains that she had conflicting plans.
We went to Pyro's.
The club. You went clubbing on a Tuesday night.
It's ladies' night.
She missed a church function in the middle of the week to go hang out with her friends at a bar? The horror. It's almost like she's a normal person.
Megan, Chris, and Mark are called into a meeting where they're told that they're being sent on a business trip to Indonesia.
Hansu Technologies is licensing our C25 chip.
Oh, that's the Chinese company, right?
This is going to be used for the new wireless media player.
It could mean actual advances in the field of science.
The office is instantly buzzing with the news that Megan is getting the OMG super amazing opportunity to go somewhere with Mark, and Blondie asks her the only question that really matters.
Okay, so what are you gonna wear? I have no idea.
Chris has a discussion with his office mate where the two of them commiserate on how much they dislike Mark's tendency to take credit for other people's work.
You mean the handsome, successful guy that all the girls are fawning over is actually a bad person? Wow, I've never seen that plot line before.
This is the day your dreams come true.
Also, there's this shocker.
At least there's an upside. Megan's going too.
Really? Maybe you'll finally ask her out.
Just waiting for the right moment.
Oh, there's a big surprise! That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise!
Later, Blondie is helping Megan pack for her trip. Chris shows up to bring her the itinerary she forgot at the office, then sticks around while she searches for her passport. During the earlier meeting, Chris had mentioned that he speaks Chinese, and Megan decides to ask him about it. The ensuing conversation is the first time that the rescued and the Island of Grace versions differ.
How do you know Chinese?
Oh, I did a study abroad thing in college.
Really? That's a weird choice.
1.5 billion Chinese people? Smart choice.
You know, normally I assume that's research or mission, but...
Yeah. I wanted to go, but by the time I was baptized and waited a year, I was past the cutoff age.
Well, I hope we can explore a little while we were in,
Indonesia.
Right. How do you know Chinese?
Oh, I did a study abroad thing in college.
Really? That's a weird choice.
1.5 billion Chinese people? Smart choice.
Well, I hope we can explore a little while we were in,
Indonesia.
Right.
Okay, I get that change. Sort of.
The 2-year mission is unique to Mormonism, but it's also something that anyone who even has a passing knowledge of the church is familiar with. The only reason I can think of for changing the scene in the way that they did would be to hide the fact that the character is Mormon from the evangelical audience.
You know, I don't get to see a whole lot outside of work.
Is that your subtle way of bugging me about going to church?
Not really.
Well, I've just been so busy and...
Hey, it's your life.
Thank you.
Chris and Megan are interrupted by Blondie, who has something very important to bring up.
Shoes!
Shoes! Oh my god, shoes.
Megan and Blondie talk about Chris, and Megan lets it slip that she knows him from church. Blondie, of course, has the only reaction to this that non-religious characters in religious movies ever have.
Really? I never pegged you as the churchy type. Now, Chris, that actually explains so much.
The purpose of this exchange is to hint that something is wrong in Megan's life because her coworkers did not automatically recognize that she was religious.
The next day, Chris and Megan are the first ones to the airport and have a conversation that is completely cut from the Island of Grace version of the film.
This change makes sense.
Megan is holding a cup that Chris at first assumes has hot chocolate in it, but when she becomes defensive about it, he realizes it's actually coffee and scolds her.
I'm really tired, okay?
Then get more sleep.
It's medicinal. Plus, I want to be awake on the plane.
That's funny. Most people like to be asleep on planes.
Most people who aren't familiar with Mormonism would probably be really confused by this scene. There's a passage in the LDS Holy Book Doctrine and Covenants that forbids them from consuming, among other things, hot drinks. Over time, this came to be interpreted as forbidding the drinking of coffee or tea. When the LDS movement first emerged, their defining characteristic, the most visible difference between them and their neighbors, was their practice of polygamy. And when polygamy was officially denounced by the church, that left them without their most powerful cultural symbol.
Over time, this gap has come to be filled by the dietary restrictions found in Doctrine and Covenants, collectively known as the Word of Wisdom. This is why Mormons in good standing refuse to consume coffee, tea, or alcohol. It might not make them stand out quite as much as the practice of polygamy did, but it does still make them stand out.
In a Mormon context, for Megan to not only be drinking coffee, but to be doing so in public, is an indicator that her devotion to the church is slipping. In an evangelical Christian context, where coffee is everybody's drug of choice, this scene would have drawn nothing but confusion from that audience.
I'm not familiar with the type of thing I'm seeing.
They get on their flight, and predictably, something goes wrong, but we never actually find out what it was. In every external shot and every shot through the window, the sky is completely clear, but for some reason a poorly rendered CGI fire breaks out in one of the engines. The pilots decide to do a quote-unquote water landing, which apparently means that Megan and Chris get buckets of water poured over their heads.
Oh, and I'm pretty sure that they crash into the ocean, because in the next scene, Mark, Megan, and Chris are in the ocean and the plane is gone.
Both pilots have died off-screen, but none of the main characters have so much as a bruise.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought something really awful had happened.
They swim to a nearby island and begin to take stock of their surroundings. Mark pulls his wet, sandy cell phone out and hands it to Chris, thinking that maybe the self-proclaimed tech guy can do something with it. This is Chris's reaction.
You think we get reception out here? Well, why don't we use the cell phone? Hello? Anyone out there? There's nobody here.
Cell phones work in places other than America, you twit. Given that you have no idea where you are, you have no way of knowing whether or not there's a signal unless you try. And even if there isn't a signal, the phone has a GPS chip. If people know your plane went down and they're looking for you, having the GPS chip active might help them find you faster, idiot.
The next day, they find a couple of plastic bottles that have washed up on the beach, along with Mark's suitcase. They decide to head into the jungle in search of food and water and find a fruit tree fairly quickly.
What happens next is one of the dumbest things I have ever seen in a film. At least until this movie's climax.
Chris and Mark are arguing about the possibility of getting lost when Megan starts hearing animal noises. She gets a little freaked out and the boys tell her that they're just birds.
But they aren't!
Those aren't birds.
Bats! Go!
Oh no! Completely harmless animals that don't even care we're here! Run!
Leaving aside the horrible CGI, why would you ever have that reaction to bats? For that matter, why are there a bunch of bats hanging around a tree in the middle of the day? Nothing about this scene makes any sense. But who cares, because being chased by bats in a random direction through the woods is apparently how you find fresh water on a deserted island.
Duh.
In an earlier scene, Chris casually mentioned to Mark that he and Megan attend the same church, so Mark decides to ask her about it.
Well, I've never heard that one before. I've never known any church patrons or whatever you call them.
You know Chris. Moron. So you're either lying or stupid. Or poorly written. You know what? Let's just go with all three.
Megan is mortified and confronts Chris.
What'd you tell him?
What?
You told him about church.
Yeah, so?
You don't tell anyone about that.
Why not? It's a part of you.
No, I mean, yes, but...
What? Are you ashamed of it?
No, I'm sorry. I don't broadcast it like you do.
Here's another spot where the Rescued and Island of Grace versions differ.
I've dealt with this my entire life. The questions, the rules, the restrictions. It's not that easy for me.
Well, it might not be, but it's kind of the point, isn't it?
Sure, you say that. Your full name is Christopher Thomas Russell. CTR, choosing the right. It's practically who you are.
Another change I understand. The motto, choose the right, is specific to Mormonism. The only problem is that the Island of Grace variant doesn't actually make any sense.
I'm tired of standing out. It's not that easy for me.
Well, it might not be, but it's kind of the point, isn't it?
Sure, you say that. Your full name is Christian Russell. You've had religion ingrained in you since you were born.
Both versions of the movie make it clear that Chris is a recent convert, not a lifelong believer. Megan knows this, so throwing this accusation at Chris doesn't make any sense in the first place, but it makes even less sense in the Island of Grace version, because while having your initials coincidentally be CTR might be seen as amusing or even meaningful in a Mormon context, having your first name coincidentally be Christian is meaningless in any context. And while I do agree with the change, I do wish they had done a better job tweaking the line for Island of Grace, because the next line in Rescued is easily my favorite one in the movie, and it got completely cut.
She knows my full name.
The next day, they decide to build a rudimentary shelter, but rather than help, Mark tries to micromanage Chris, and Chris confronts him about it.
You don't do anything, you just sweet talk everyone, flash a little smile, and take credit for their work.
Are you still hung up on that?
You got where you are because... I got where I am because I work hard. I may not be the hands-on guy, but I know what I'm doing.
Then, as Chris continues working, Mark goes over to Megan and starts turning on the charm.
Well, yeah, it's every guy's fantasy to be chased by women, but everyone seems to put me on this pedestal. They don't see the real me. Well, I'm not perfect, but there's more to me than just...
Money, success, good looks.
Sure, point them all out.
Did you ever think that maybe there's more to life than being really, really, really ridiculously good looking?
But that's exactly what people see first.
So what's the cure? Give away the money, fail, smear a little mud on your face?
No. Just find someone who can see more than that.
I'm sorry, but especially given his reputation around the office as a ladies' man, if she really can't tell that this is a line he uses on all the girls, she deserves to get her heart broken.
Chris is taking an inventory of all of their supplies when Megan walks up whining about the lack of variety in their diet.
Hey, Chris. Can I borrow your knife?
Hey, wait! I'm having one of those things. You know, a headache with pictures.
An idea?
Megan uses the knife to make a crude spear, which she then tries to fish with. This goes about as well as you'd expect. Mark comes over and tries to help, but has similar results.
Are you sure this even works?
Nope.
Chris watches the two having fun in the surf and sulks, especially when Mark manages to actually catch a fish in between edits. Mark starts to gut the fish, which grosses Megan out, so she and Chris go walking in the jungle where they find some coconuts. Meanwhile, Mark decides to go sunbathe, meaning that he's asleep when a boat appears in the distance. Megan and Chris see the boat, but by the time they rush back to the beach and attempt to light the signal fire they set up earlier, the boat is gone.
What were you doing? The boat was right there!
You couldn't light it fast enough.
I wouldn't have to if you'd been away!
Where's the boat?
You really think this is gonna work? Those ships are miles out. The whole island would have to be on fire for them to notice.
You are so what?
You're right. We need a better solution.
Later, in some awful day for night shots, they're gathered around a campfire spewing CGI smoke, about to share the fish that Mark caught, when Chris suggests that one of them say grace. Mark really doesn't care, but of course Megan is super embarrassed anyway.
Do you want to say it?
No.
This movie pounds away at the theme of Megan desperately wanting to fit in and being anxious that her faith will make her stand out. This is a potentially interesting idea, but the problem is that they create a world where her attitude doesn't make any sense. While the non-religious characters in the movie are surprised when they find out that Megan is religious, none of them actually react negatively. She talks about not wanting to stand out, but when people find out that she is/was someone who goes to church, she still doesn't stand out because people are only mildly curious, but otherwise don't care. Furthermore, Megan never even implies that she's doubting her faith and never recalls a single incident where she was ostracized or even mildly inconvenienced because of her beliefs.
This creates a major credibility problem for Megan's character. It's like the filmmakers wanted her to struggle with living out her faith in a secular world, but were afraid that if they were too specific about what makes her uncomfortable, it might legitimize her concerns.
This means that in the final product, Megan only struggles with expressing her faith because the plot says she has to, making her look like an idiot for stressing out over a problem that doesn't actually exist.
Are you familiar with the old robot saying, "Does not compute"?
The next day, Megan asks Chris why he doesn't like Mark. And for reasons that are never explained in the movie, Chris won't come out and just tell Megan the truth. Instead, he says some vague stuff about Mark not being what he pretends to be, followed by this.
Just don't see how you can fall for it.
Smooth, dude. Very smooth.
Why do you care if I like him or not?
I don't. I don't want you to forget who you are.
Thanks, Dad.
Hey, I've seen it. You're changing.
Change is a good thing.
Not all the time.
Are you trying to suggest that she's changing because of Mark? Because that doesn't make sense. You were clearly disapproving of her long before she and Mark started being flirty.
When you got your job at the company, you know what made me notice you?
Chris.
You were sitting in the break room reading the Book of Mormon. Every day you did that.
Wait, if she used to sit in the break room reading the Book of Mormon, or if you're watching Island of Grace, the Bible, why does nobody but Chris know she's religious?
There was something different about you.
Yeah, it's called being a dork.
No, it's called cherishing something. Because of your example, I asked about what made you different, what gave you that light in your eyes. It made me realize I was missing something in my life. How can you be ashamed of that now?
I'm not!
You got all embarrassed about praying the other day.
I didn't want to force it on Mark.
Nice excuse. What about not going to church anymore?
I'd go.
Or clubbing all weekend, or working even on Sunday. When I met you, you never would have done that. You never would be justifying drinking coffee and lattes because it's medicinal.
That was different.
Sure it was.
Hey, remember when I said this?
Hey, it's your life.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't really mean that. Here, let me judge you some more.
Growing up in the church, it's so restricting. You don't know what it's like.
What, because I joined the church? So how could I understand because I'm a convert?
Yeah.
I still had to make changes, but it was worth it.
But for me...
You know what, Megan? You can rationalize it all you want. But until you get past the excuses and think about it honestly, you're just lying to yourself.
Here's my problem with this scene, and with this whole storyline in general. The movie has made it very clear up to this point that Chris and Megan don't actually know each other that well. They're acquaintances, not friends. When Chris makes these rude, judgmental statements, it's not because he knows her better than she does, it's because he saw her neglecting a few outward signs of piety and jumped to his own conclusions. If she had kept right on going through the motions while turning away from God in her heart, Chris would never have noticed.
Chris's problem with Megan isn't that her faith is slipping, because he couldn't possibly know whether it was or not. His problem is that she's not keeping up appearances, which makes him a bit of a douche on top of being hopelessly judgmental. And this is the character we're supposed to identify with.
Chris's little rant makes Megan understandably angry, and because she's an idiot, her response to being angry is to stomp off through the jungle in a random direction while talking to herself.
Don't be ashamed. I am ashamed of you! Why don't you try to deal with what I face? Walk a mile in my shoes. These aren't even shoes!
These shoes suck. Later, Chris returns to the beach and is worried when he finds that Megan hasn't come back yet.
You watched her wander off into the jungle and you know she's an idiot. What did you think would happen?
What was the question?
Chris and Mark go looking for Megan, and as they're walking, Mark starts asking Chris questions about him and Megan.
Well, I've known her a while, and I worry about some of the things that she's mixed up in.
What, like drugs?
No, nothing like that.
Megan's a grown woman. She knows what she's doing.
Hope so.
Yeah, you saw that right. Mark, the stereotypical shallow, conceited backstabber, just showed more respect for Megan as a person than Chris did. Pretty sure that was not intentional on the writer's part.
Meanwhile, it starts to dawn on Megan that she's gotten lost, and she immediately jumps to the most obvious conclusion.
Is this my punishment? I only missed a few Sundays.
Yes, this is 100% God punishing you for not going to church, and totally not your own stupid fault for wandering off into the wilderness and not paying attention to where you were going.
There is logic in what he says.
God's wrath is continuing to follow her, and I'm wondering at this point if the filmmakers intended for that to actually be what's happening, because she's wandering along a hill made of loose dirt, not watching where she's going, implying that what happens next is her own fault, but there's also a giant thunderclap when she loses her footing and starts to slide down the slope.
She lost her shoes!
As she's hanging on and trying not to slip further down the hill, Megan starts to pray.
Holy Father, I'm sorry. Please help.
She starts calling for help, and this time Chris hears her and rushes to the rescue. He's able to toss her a vine and get her to safety.
Slipped.
I can tell. How'd you get up here?
I was trying to get back to the beach.
You're on a cliff. Beaches are at sea level.
I don't know where everything is.
She's not smart enough to recognize that up is up and down is down. Truly a heroine for the ages.
Chris wisely starts to apologize for being a jerk, but is interrupted when Mark finds them.
Oh, hi, Mark.
And the trio head back to the beach. As they sit around the campfire waiting for the fish to finish cooking, Megan awkwardly thanks Chris for saving her, and we know she's learned her lesson because...
Should we pray?
Go for it. I never got into it, but...
Really?
Not only is she willing to pray in front of people again, she's also somehow forgotten that Mark isn't religious, even though the two of them talked about it less than 24 hours ago. But what's more interesting is the reason Mark gives for why he's not religious.
God requires too much time. I'm busy enough as it is.
That's it. That is all the information we get. He didn't ponder the deep questions of existence and decide that there is no God. He didn't have any negative experiences that drove him away from religion. He doesn't seem to have put any thought into it at all. He just looked at his schedule, looked at religion, and said, nah, I don't feel like moving things around to make time for that.
The next morning, Chris shows them his plan to make a homemade flare using cologne and coconuts.
You probably think I'm kidding about that.
Contents under pressure. When they get hot, say by fire, they explode. Put all that in a coconut shell with a flame, might work.
Yeah, and monkeys might fly out of my butt.
Yep, that is really the plan they're going with. But who cares? Let's talk about religion some more.
I feel like everyone looks down on us and what we believe.
Do they? I didn't when I met you.
Yeah, well, you're a rare exception.
No, he isn't. Nobody in the real world or the movie world cares if you're religious. Stop making things up.
Was it a hard adjustment for you?
Yeah. But it was worth it. This is true. God is real and he loves us. So what else matters?
This speech is apparently what Megan needed to hear in order to get over her irrational and imaginary issues, which is good because they were starting to get really annoying and repetitive. The next day, Chris tries and fails to ease his way into asking Megan out, but she still thinks he's trying to pressure her into going to church, which, considering how he's treated her thus far in the movie, isn't an unreasonable conclusion to come to. In the end, it doesn't matter because Mark interrupts them and Megan decides to go for water. Then, Mark and Chris have this exchange.
Does it ever feel like something always gets in the way of what you want? Sure, sometimes. It's pretty annoying. That's why you just gotta keep trying and never give up. Although if you keep trying and you just still don't get anywhere, it just depends on how bad you want it. But if you quit, you're guaranteed to fail.
This inspires Chris to start wandering through the woods practicing asking Megan out.
Megan, when I think of a flower,
I'm in trouble.
While Chris is talking to himself, Mark meets up with Megan at the waterfall and starts charming her again, which ends the way scenes in cheesy love triangle movies always end.
If nothing else, I just thought you should know in case you felt the same.
Chris goes into ultra super duper brooding mode, and we have a montage of him building what he incorrectly calls a catapult, while Megan and Mark act all coupley. Eventually, Megan tries to talk to him, and he confronts her about Mark.
When we get back, do you think he's gonna be as sweet? Do you ever wonder why he always has a new girlfriend?
You'll start to see who he really is.
I like who he is.
You like who you think he is. There's a difference.
The best way to get on your crush's good side is definitely to criticize her taste in men. Good work!
Then randomly blurt out that you like her. That's also a good strategy.
I've been trying to tell you for the longest time, but you barely even notice me when Mark's around. I like you, Megan. A lot. Now I'm not even sure why.
Oh right, I forgot. You should also question her devotion to her religion at the same time you're telling her how much you like her. That'll have her swooning in no time.
I mean, do we still believe in the same things?
Don't question what I believe. Just because I don't make a spectacle of my testimony doesn't mean I don't believe.
Your actions are a reflection of your beliefs. You're trying so hard to fit in and be accepted that you're compromising the things that really matter.
You know what? I'm tired of you always judging me. Nothing I do is ever good enough. I'm never strong enough, not the perfect person you want me to be. Why don't you stop being so self-righteous and let me be who I am?
The next day, the trio hear a plane flying overhead, and Chris puts his master plan into action.
I'm neither a scientist nor an engineer, but I'm pretty sure that if they didn't put that CGI explosion there, that coconut would have fallen 3 feet in front of him and not done anything.
But since this movie is set in a universe where no one acts like a real person, and being in a plane crash is only a minor inconvenience if you're a main character, this stupid plan of flinging flaming coconuts into the air is wildly successful to the point where the bad CGI makes it look like Chris was able to launch them several hundred feet. The actual rescue happens off screen, but once the trio are back home, Blondie gets right to what's important.
Okay, it's too bad about those shoes, though. I can't believe that you and Mark are a thing. I don't even know what the rest of us girls are gonna do. But there's a new guy, and not only is he tall and rich, he's divorced.
Megan, assuming that she and Mark are still an item now that they've been rescued, tries to secure a date with him, but he brushes her off. So instead she goes to talk to Chris.
Listen, about what happened, I want to apologize. You were right about me judging you. I just want you to know that I'm glad that you introduced me to the gospel. Going back to not having that in my life, can't imagine it. Knowing that I'm not alone, it makes all the difference.
Aww, that might be sweet if you hadn't had this conversation multiple times before and then gone right back to being a judgmental jerk.
Chris starts to tell Megan that it's his last day at the company, but of course he's interrupted and tells his co-worker instead. The next day, Megan overhears Mark telling the story of their rescue to a group of women.
But then I get to thinking, what about fish? So I made this spear, and I go knee-deep into water, and I just waited.
Wow. Skip to the end. You guys haven't even heard the best part. Tell them about how you got everyone off the island.
No, so I gathered up all my stuff, right? Mousse and shaving cream, and we put the stuff in coconut so we could create a flare. But then I get to thinking, how are we going to get these flares up in the air? So we build a catapult, right?
Later, after she finds out that Chris has quit, she overhears Mark talking about her.
Well, Megan's nice, but we're just friends.
Really?
Yeah, this may sound awful, but she's a little shallow.
You know what's sad about this scene? It's supposed to be further proof that Mark is a horrible person, but when he says that Megan is shallow, he's right.
Megan, as a character, has no depth whatsoever. She liked Mark because he was handsome, rich, and flattered her. Throughout the film, the only things she has expressed an interest in are clothes, cute boys, and being popular. She is the definition of shallow. Hearing the truth about how Mark sees her sends Megan into a crying montage, and the audience doesn't really care because only a moron like Megan wouldn't have seen this coming. The next day, Blondie invites her to go to Vegas over the weekend, and we know Megan has changed for the better because...
Can't. I have church this Sunday. You picked church over Vegas? Wow, you're really starting to sound like Chris. What's wrong with that? Nothing. It's just a little geeky. Maybe, but thanks for inviting me. Okay.
She said something about church! And just look at all of the massive social repercussions she's facing because of it. Blondie almost cared there for a second before getting distracted by something shiny.
Mark sees Megan in the hallway, and asks if she wants to go out, but she turns him down.
I just think I'm a little too shallow for you.
What, you have a better offer?
And only now does it occur to Megan that yes, she does have a better offer.
Relatively speaking.
Megan starts trying to track Chris down and finds out he's staying with his sister in Hawaii. At first, she's content to wait until he comes back, but she's encouraged by Chris's coworker to just go and see him.
Because that's not creepy or stalkery at all.
After filling her suitcase with nothing but a bunch of shirts and a Bible, Megan goes to Hawaii and finds Chris sitting on the beach. She tells him how she feels, stating things slightly differently in each version of the film.
I called the bishop to get your parents' number, and that was after the Elders Quorum president and the Relief Society president, and, well, you get the idea.
I had to call your neighbors, your landlord, and eventually I figured out you listed your parents as your emergency contact at work.
Well, that was a weird change. Why couldn't she have found him through church contacts in Island of Grace? Do the filmmakers think that evangelical churches don't work that way? Or do they see hacking into employee personnel files as equivalent to calling someone's bishop?
I finally realized you were right about Mark. And also about me. You're a better influence in my life than Mark or anyone could be.
Haven't you always wanted the person of your dreams to stare deeply into your eyes and tell you that you're a good influence on them?
I only regret... Well, I have two regrets.
What?
One, I was doing all the wrong things. I might have opened your eyes to the gospel, but you opened mine in how to live it.
No, he berated you about slipping in your outward signs of piety until you fell in line. That is not the same thing.
One, I was doing all the wrong things. I might have opened your eyes to Christ, but you opened mine to see how much he really matters.
Okay. Not sure why they decided they needed to change that line, but the movie's almost over, so whatever, I don't care.
And two, that I might have missed my chance to be with you.
You only have one regret.
And with that, we have the conclusion to this stupid story.
This movie is awful no matter which version you're watching. As a deserted island story, it's boring, with the characters finding everything they need to survive with absurd ease and being rescued through one of the dumbest, most contrived rigs I've ever seen in a movie. And as a love story, it is pathetically bad.
When the audience gets to the end of a cheesy love triangle movie and comes to the conclusion that they wouldn't want to date either of these jerks, you know your writer did a lousy job.
Then, of course, there's the religious aspect, which is nonsensical, mean-spirited, and just plain insulting. Both the characters and the promotional materials make this out to be a story about how Chris saved Megan's soul and brought her back to God. But all he really did was guilt her about not coming to church every week and daring to have a social life.
This is not romantic. And far from glorifying spirituality, it unintentionally casts religion in an incredibly negative light.
Religion in this movie isn't a spiritual commitment to a deity, it's a strict set of arbitrary rules that you have to follow no matter what, or God will drop you off a cliff.
The way this movie was marketed also doesn't do the LDS Church any favors.
In a bizarre move, Candlelight did their level best to try and prevent anyone at all in the evangelical world from finding out that Island of Grace was originally a Mormon movie. They even went so far as to create a fake distribution company and change the actors' names for Island of Grace so that the two movies wouldn't be linked together on search databases.
A fair number of evangelicals have this slightly paranoid fear that Mormons are constantly trying to use ruses and tricks to lure people into what those evangelicals believe is a cult. Candlelight knows this. All Mormons know this. So if the goal was to reach out to evangelicals, looking like they've got something to hide was a really stupid move.
Both versions of this movie are beautifully shot on gorgeous locations, but that's pretty much all it has going for it. The acting is mediocre, the writing is terrible, the characters are all unlikable idiots, and the message is confusing at best and awful at worst.
In trying to satisfy two audiences, Candlelight managed to bore and insult both. That is no small achievement. I'm Namio, and the deepest sincerity cannot excuse bad art.